against pop culture coming up right after this. This is the Vega Pod, inviting you to look at the issues through a biblical lens. Tonight, we're going to be looking at pop culture, Christians against pop culture. What does that mean? What does that look like? Why are Christians against pop culture? As some of you may already know, I did a video advocating for how Christians should interact with pop culture and that they should interact with pop culture. This is more of a follow up, a different point of view, kind of a quote unquote a response. As we look through some of the slides, we'll see how there's a perspective and we'll see a counter perspective. Someone is responding to the idea of Christians being against pop culture and how Christians may not want to engage in that arena. So without further ado, let me go ahead and share my screen. I did notice in the last video that the logo up top was kind of blocking some of the text. So I'm going to go ahead and chop off my hide my logo here. All right, let me go ahead and pull this up. Okay. All right. Let me see how this looks here. I like the full screen better. Yeah, I like this better. I think it's easier to see. All right, let's go ahead and run right through this. Here we go. Christians against pop culture. Christians love pop culture these days. So the first few slides we're going to look at are going to be making the case that Christians should be against pop culture, or at the very least, that Christians shouldn't be engaging in pop culture. So, pop culture as a mode of engagement, pop culture as a means of reaching this or that group, pop culture as a way of relating to students. Christians love pop culture, and Christians with an audience want fellow Christians to love pop culture. Why should Christians like, love, or engage with pop culture? I don't think there are very many, or perhaps any, good answers to that question. So, flat out, this is from the Mere Orthodoxy article. I'll make sure to include the link in the description of the video. I would encourage you to read through the article, even if you don't agree with his viewpoint. I already kind of showed my hand with the first video that I made. I think it's challenging. It definitely kind of pushes back on maybe some ideas. So it's definitely worth the read. There are now reasons for why Christians or anyone ought to be enthusiastic consumers of pop culture, much less evangelists for it. And rather than flail around for half-baked arguments in support of that view, let me posit the contrary. There are no good reasons. So again, he's not being shy. Very clear. There are no good reasons for Christians to engage in pop culture. Again, this is his perspective, his point of view, and this is the article from Mere Orthodoxy. And I would encourage you to read it, even if you disagree with what he's saying. Let's jump into the next slide. The boring fact is that Christians like pop culture for the same reasons everyone else does. It's convenient, undemanding, diverting, entertaining, and socially rewarded. And Christians with an audience either rationalize that fact with high minded justifications and vest that activity with meaning it lacks, but must have to warrant the time Christians give to it, or instrumentalize it toward other non trivial ends. The truth is that for every hour that you did not spend watching Netflix, your life will be improved and you will have the opportunity to do something better with that time. Netflix, and here again, I'm using Netflix as a stand in for all digital and social media today. It's a principality and a power, as is the enormous flat screen television set situated like a beloved household god in every living room and every home across the country. Again, he's not being shy. He is telling you how he sees it. There's no sugarcoating it. Very direct, very right to the point. And some of his concerns are legitimate, right? Sometimes we get caught up and we spend too much time on Netflix. So we spend too much time watching TV, watching the game, right? I, like most other people, enjoy watching football, right? But we have to be careful. That can quickly turn into an idol. If you're sitting there in front of the TV watching football games for 7 hours straight while not engaging with your family, if you have kids, and if you're, I guess, justifying sitting there watching the games because you did something else the day before, or you went to church early in the morning, so now you feel like you can do this, might be a cause for concern there. And I would encourage you to think through it and to keep in mind, and we're going to look at this verse later on, but I believe it's 1 Corinthians 10, verse 23. I also mentioned that verse in the previous video. I'm going to jump back here to the last slide for a quick second. He mentions here that Christians shouldn't be evangelists for pop culture. I agree wholeheartedly with this. If you're out there promoting and pushing for Christians to engage in pop culture, those that maybe don't want to, or those that are kind of taken back from it, you should be evangelizing the good news of Jesus Christ, not pop culture. All right. And let's go ahead and jump into this third slide here. It calls for attention. It demands your love. It wants you. And its desire for you elicits desire in you for it. Here, if I'm not mistaken, he is talking about the TV in your household and how it becomes a beloved or a beloved household God. It demands your attention, right? You're at home, you're hanging out. A lot of times you don't have nothing to do, or just to kind of, we call it background noise or whatever. You turn on the TV, but something happens when we do this over and over again. And when this starts to take precedent over your time with your family, over your time with God, it's a concern, right? We have to be, you have to be aware. We have to be careful. And again, I showed my card because in my first video, I do believe that Christians should engage in pop culture, but I also said in that video that we should be discerning when we engage pop culture. Now he takes aside that we shouldn't engage in it at all. I don't agree with that, but I think he makes some solid points. We have to show and exercise good judgment, right? We have to show and exercise good discernment. The notion that this generation simply cannot be expected to read a book cover to cover, or that the book must be pitched at a ninth grade level, or that assignments ought to engage other forms of digital media because this is the world we live in. Again, he's making the point that if we think that in order for people to engage in any sort of learning, they need to be entertained and be entertained with pop culture, we're setting ourselves up. And I see this happen often with youth ministry. I think we set the bar too low. Therefore, students don't grow. They don't take next steps because it's kind of very surface level. And I see the pros and cons for that, but I think in most cases, if not all cases, I think the cons outweigh the pros. Therefore, we should eliminate that train of thought. We should expect them to read a book cover to cover. We should expect them to read books that are not at a ninth grade or a lower grade level. We need to stretch them. That's how we all grow. We grow by being stretched, and that's biblical. We grow through God grows us through trials and tribulations, right? That endurance is key to our growth. And here he quotes Neil Postman. He says, "But as Neil Postman has taught us, when education is made to be entertaining, students do not learn while also happening to be entertained." It's a thin line to walk there, right? I'm not a teacher, so I can't say for sure one way or the other, but I do see how this could be difficult, right? It's a difficult area to navigate with educating and entertaining. It's hard not to fall into the trap of leaning one way or the other, and sometimes those two can't coexist, which is what he's saying. Now, this guy is a teacher, so I guess we should maybe at least consider what he's saying. All right. Now, so this is the response, and this is the article from equip.org. And again, I will include the link in the description of the video. I would encourage you to read this article as well. I would say start with the Mere Orthodoxy article first, because this is more of a response to that article. And there are a few other ones. In Mere Orthodoxy, you'll see a couple different links for other articles that kind of popped up. And in the equip.org site, he also quotes another article by the guy from the Mere Orthodoxy site. So it'll make for good thinking as you read it. But while I agree that there's a real danger of excessive consumption of pop culture, I want to defend the notion of engaging with pop culture. And this was the point of my whole previous video on pop culture. Enjoying and discussing pop culture reflectively reflectively, can't read today, and in moderation is part of the solution to binge watching culture, not a symptom of the problem. Why is pop culture valuable? I believe that it is valuable because culture is one of the ways in which we image God. It has the potential to reflect the creativity of God and to express goodness, truth, and beauty while grappling with the challenges of a broken, sinful world. Now, I really appreciate this last bullet point here because I do think it's one way that we reflect the creativity of God, right? We reflect God in that sense by engaging in pop culture and expressing the goodness and the truth and the beauty, which ultimately comes from God and finds its foundation only in Jesus Christ. So this is why I believe that we should engage in pop culture. So I'm in agreement here with him. Now, I would agree with concerns that it's not healthy for pop culture to be the only or main thing that connects us or that we are to talk about. But it also gives us a way of understanding different viewpoints, of entering into other people's experiences. Again, I agree. And I can actually I'll share after I read a couple more of these. Those stories reflect and shape the way they think and feel, and attentive listening helps us to understand better the people around us. So I've actually done this firsthand. When I started my new job a few years ago, a coworker of mine, in order for me to be able to have these conversations that would eventually lead to faith or kind of, and I guess, introduce this idea of my faith in Jesus into conversation without kind of forcing it in, I had to kind of get in his world a little bit. Now he's really into pop culture stuff, right? You know, movies, music, um, the news, right? So I had to kind of get in there in order to get an idea of his train of thought and then engage in that, I guess, what's the right word here, in that culture, right? For lack of a better word, and introduce the gospel to him, right? And tell him about Jesus and ask follow-up questions to his thinking. How is he making these, moral um arguments, or how is he making these moral claims if his worldview doesn't necessarily allow him to do so, and showing how that might not be a solid or a consistent worldview and it's not livable. But before I could get to that point, I had to engage in his train of thought. So I think this is very important, and it's key, and it's something for us to utilize. But as he says it at the very offset of that first bullet point, there are concerns if pop culture is the only or main thing that connects us or that we are able to talk about. I've also seen the bad side of that. Sometimes when we're at lunch, this is all they talk about. It never gets into anything more in depth. It's very shallow, very surface level. That's not good, right? So we have to, as Christians, we have to be careful, yet we have to be willing to engage while being faithful to God, to his word. That's bullet point here. It is a form of the double listening that John Stott argued that Christians are called to, where we listen to both the word with humble reverence and to the world with critical alertness. I loved how that's put there. It is better to thoughtfully respond than to passively consume pop culture, but better yet, it's getting stuck in and engaging culture by creating culture. If pop culture and cultural engagement are in principle good, how should we then stream? The principle that everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial, 1 Corinthians 10:23, is an important one here. If we appreciate activities that bring us into direct contact with other human beings, from meals shared to conversations to games, then perhaps we will spend more time on those than sitting in silence together in front of screens. All right. Let me go ahead and jump back here. Share my screen. Let's see. There I am. All right. Put the logo back up here for a few. So, a couple of verses that also come to mind, and I believe I mentioned this verse in the first video. It's in Romans 12 when it tells us not to be conformed by this world, but be renewed, right? Um, that's a process that God does in us when we are to, our mind gets renewed by the time we spend with God, by the time we spend in his word. The last bullet point mentions relationships. This is something that Jesus modeled for us throughout the gospels. Jesus was about the relationships. He built relationships with the people that were considered outcasts, the people that others had forgotten about, that the religious leaders had forgotten about. Jesus sought those people out. Now, for us, when it comes to pop culture, right, the application is slightly different, but the principle is there. The relationships, the people are what matter. Let's connect with those people. Let's point them to Jesus. If we use pop culture to do so, great. If we can't use pop culture, maybe we use pop culture as a negative example. But let's make sure that we point them to Jesus. All right. That's all. I appreciate you guys tuning in. I I'm hoping to remain consistent with uploading videos at least once a week. Have a few other things in the work. Keep an eye out. And I appreciate you guys. Have a great night. Have a great week and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Catch you guys next time.